The wind moves strangely along Gilgo Beach. It howls softly, not with menace but with memory. Just beyond the sand dunes, a story has waited, half buried, partially told, and painfully unresolved. In December 2010, Suffolk County Police were not searching for a serial killer. They were looking for a missing woman named Shannan Gilbert. A 24-year-old escort from New Jersey, Shannan had vanished months earlier after fleeing a client's home in Oak Beach, barefoot and panicked. Her 911 call, spanning over 20 minutes, captured confusion, fear, and unanswered cries for help. But what police found in the course of their search would reshape the area's history. Less than a quarter mile from where Shannan was last seen, investigators discovered the remains of another woman, wrapped in burlap and discarded near the roadside. Then another, and another, and another. In the years since that winter discovery, Gilgo Beach has become a symbol of questions. Who killed these women? How many victims were there? And why did it take so long to connect the dots? More than a decade passed before an arrest was made. But even that didn't settle the case. In many ways, it only deepened the mystery. This is the story of a Long Island serial killer. A case of digital footprints, missed warnings, and an ocean of unanswered questions. Across 10 scenes, we'll walk the edges of Gilgo Beach, through crime scenes, cover-ups, and community unrest. Not to sensationalize, but to understand. Because sometimes, truth waits beneath the sand. On December 11th, 2010, a K-9 unit was brought to Gilgo Beach on Jones Beach Island, Suffolk County, New York. Police were continuing their months-long search for Shannan Gilbert. She had vanished in May after making a 911 call that suggested she feared for her life. But the dog, a cadaver-trained German shepherd named Blue, didn't lead investigators to Shannan. Instead, near Ocean Parkway, it signaled near thick underbrush just off the road. What officers found was a set of human remains, skeletal, wrapped in burlap, and partially decomposed. The discovery was grim, but what followed would change the scale entirely. 2 days later, investigators found a second set of remains about 500 feet from the first. The next day, a third, and then a fourth, all within a quarter-mile stretch. This was no coincidence. These weren't isolated disappearances. The beach, long seen as a summer retreat, was now a crime scene, one that had been hiding bodies in plain sight. The victims, all young women, had been missing for several years. Their remains were preserved by the wrapping and the sandy conditions. Police noted the consistency. Each woman was small in stature, worked as an escort, and had advertised services through Craigslist or similar sites. Suddenly, Suffolk County Police weren't looking for Shannan Gilbert. They were investigating a possible serial killer. The area was cordoned off. The FBI was consulted, but not fully brought in. Public concern mounted. Local law enforcement pledged to expand the search, first along Ocean Parkway, then into the dense brush and marshland surrounding it. But still, no trace of Shannan. What had begun as a search for one woman had become something much larger. Gilgo Beach was now the focus of a grim pattern, with evidence buried just beyond the surf line. The sand was no longer silent. It was telling a story no one wanted to believe. By mid-December 2010, 4 victims had been found along Gilgo Beach. Their bodies were separated by short distances, hidden in nearly identical ways, each wrapped in burlap, each positioned near Ocean Parkway. For investigators and the public alike, one question loomed. Who were these women? Within weeks, authorities identified them. They became known collectively as the Gilgo Four. The first was Maureen Brainerd Barnes, 25, from Norwich, Connecticut. She had disappeared in 2007 after traveling to New York City to meet a client. She was a single mother and had used Craigslist to advertise escort services. The second, Melissa Barthélemy, 24, vanished in July 2009. A resident of the Bronx, she had also advertised online. In a disturbing twist, after her disappearance, her younger sister began receiving vulgar and taunting calls from Melissa's phone. Calls later traced to cell towers in Manhattan. The third, Megan Waterman, was 22 and from Scarborough, Maine. She had last been seen in June 2010, leaving a hotel in Hauppauge, Long Island. Like the others, she was working as an escort and had a young child. The fourth, Amber Lynn Costello, 27, was from North Babylon, New York. She disappeared in early September 2010. She had told her roommate she was meeting a new client that night, someone offering a large sum for her services. Each woman had disappeared between 2007 and 2010. All were petite, in their early to mid-20s, and engaged in sex work. Each had used similar digital platforms. These similarities pointed toward an organized, calculated offender, someone who likely studied their routines, gained their trust, and planned each encounter with precision. The discovery of the Gilgo 4 made one thing chillingly clear. The killer knew the area well, knew how to dispose of bodies without detection, and likely had a clear pattern. This wasn't opportunistic violence. It was deliberate, structured. Law enforcement now faced the difficult task of tracing years-old digital records, dead phones, and missing persons files that hadn't always received priority. Public pressure increased. The media caught on. Serial killer fears swept Long Island. And yet, the Gilgo 4 were only the beginning. After the discovery of the Gilgo 4 in December 2010, Suffolk County Police expanded their search. The pattern was too structured, too methodical. There was concern, justified concern, that there were more victims nearby. In March and April of 2011, additional remains were uncovered in the surrounding areas, both east and west of the original crime scene. As investigators combed the brush along Ocean Parkway, they found partial and dismembered remains belonging to several individuals. These discoveries changed the scope of the case entirely. The first new remains found belonged to Jessica Taylor. She had been partially dismembered, with parts of her body discovered in Manorville in 2003, nearly 50 miles away. Now, her skull and other bones were located near Gilgo Beach. That meant the killer may have used multiple disposal sites over time. Shortly after, police found more remains, some wrapped, some scattered. Among them were those of Valerie Mack, a 24-year-old woman also dismembered and originally found in Manorville in 2000. Her identity wouldn't be confirmed until 2020 through advanced DNA testing. Then came even more perplexing discoveries. A woman nicknamed Peaches, a torso found in Hempstead Lake State Park in 1997, now matched to a head and hands recovered near Gilgo. Nearby, the remains of a toddler, believed to be Peaches' child, were also discovered. Adding to the mystery was the partial skeleton of an Asian male dressed in women's clothing. His cause of death and identity remain unknown. By mid-2011, the total number of recovered victims had climbed to 10. Most were women, but not all fit the original profile. Some were dismembered, others not. Some wrapped in burlap, others discarded differently. The consistency that defined the Gilgo 4 was breaking down. This raised new questions. Was there more than one killer? Had bodies from older, unrelated cases been placed in the same area? Or had the perpetrator evolved, changing methods over time? What had seemed like a clear pattern was now a tangle of overlapping timelines, varying methods, and unconfirmed connections. Gilgo Beach wasn't hiding one story. It was hiding several, and investigators were only beginning to realize how deep this would go. Before the Gilgo 4, before the task forces and national headlines, there was Shannan Gilbert. Shannan was 24 years old when she disappeared in the early morning hours of May 1st, 2010. A resident of Jersey City and working as an escort, she had arranged a late-night appointment with a client in the gated Oak Beach community on Long Island. She was driven there by her driver, who waited outside while she went in. Sometime after arriving, something went wrong. At 4:51 a.m., Shannan called 911. Her call lasted over 22 minutes. In it, she repeatedly said, "They're trying to kill me." Her voice sounded frantic and confused. She fled the home, running to neighbors' houses, banging on doors, pleading for help. Residents later testified that she appeared disoriented and panicked. Despite the clear signs of distress, police did not arrive until nearly an hour later. By then, Shannan had vanished into the marshes behind the neighborhood. For months, Police claimed she was likely not a victim of foul play. They suggested she had become disoriented, possibly due to a mental health episode or substance use, and drowned in the wetlands. It wasn't until December 2011, over a year later, that her remains were discovered in a thick, muddy marsh less than half a mile from where she was last seen. Her purse, shoes, and jeans were found scattered nearby. The official cause of death was ruled undetermined. The Suffolk County Police Department maintained that her death was accidental, but others disagreed. Her family hired a private pathologist who reviewed the autopsy. He found signs of possible strangulation and argued that her death was likely a homicide. Advocates and the public began to suspect that Shannan's case was being treated differently, perhaps dismissed, because of her background. Although Shannan's remains were found separate from the Gilgo Four and her death remains technically unrelated, she remains at the center of the case. Her disappearance is what ultimately led police to uncover the other victims. Whether she was killed by the same person or by someone else entirely remains unresolved. Shannan Gilbert didn't just vanish. She started a chain reaction, one that exposed a pattern of violence long buried beneath the sand. As the body count near Gilgo Beach grew, so did public frustration with the Suffolk County Police Department. What began as unease turned into widespread criticism of investigative delays, lack of transparency, and possible misconduct. One major point of contention was the department's decision not to bring in the FBI during the early stages of the investigation. For years, the case remained largely under local jurisdiction, even as it expanded and complexities mounted. Many questioned why federal resources weren't utilized sooner. Officials claimed it was unnecessary. Critics called it negligence. That concern only deepened with the case of then Police Chief James Burke. In 2012, Burke was accused of beating a suspect who had stolen a duffel bag from his vehicle, one allegedly containing sex toys and pornography. Burke later orchestrated a cover-up, pressuring subordinates to conceal the assault. The FBI eventually launched an investigation into Burke himself. In 2016, he was sentenced to 46 months in federal prison for civil rights violations and conspiracy to obstruct justice. His downfall had nothing directly to do with the Gilgo Beach case, but it cast a shadow over the department's leadership and credibility during the crucial years of the investigation. Meanwhile, victims' families voiced their frustrations. Some claimed their missing persons reports were not taken seriously. Others said they were treated dismissively because their loved ones were sex workers. The slow pace of progress led to speculation that someone within law enforcement might be protecting the killer, or worse. A culture of silence, secrecy, and internal politics seemed to define the early years of the Gilgo Beach case. Transparency was limited. Press conferences were rare. Evidence was tightly controlled. Even years after the initial discoveries, the public knew remarkably little about what police had uncovered. The Suffolk County Police Department eventually announced new leadership and formed a dedicated task force in 2022. But by then, trust had eroded. For many observers, the delays weren't just procedural. They were part of the story, another mystery within the mystery. The question wasn't just who the killer was. It was also why the system seemed so reluctant or unable to find them. By the time 10 victims had been recovered near Gilgo Beach, the question shifted from what happened to who did this, and whether it was the work of a single person. The original Gilgo Four, similar in age, profession, and method of disposal, strongly suggested a serial killer with a specific victim type. The use of burlap, the close proximity of the remains, and the apparent use of online escort platforms pointed to a perpetrator who was both organized and careful. But the other victims complicated the picture. Dismemberment, varying ages, a child, a man, some killed years earlier and dumped elsewhere. The inconsistencies fueled debate. Was it possible that Gilgo Beach had become a dumping ground for multiple killers? Could someone have been taking advantage of the area's remoteness and the assumption that any body found there was part of the same case? Forensic profilers weighed in. The FBI suggested the killer, or killers, might be someone familiar with law enforcement procedures. someone methodical with a strong need for control. Possibly a local resident, likely male, educated but socially isolated, comfortable using technology. Theories spread across forums and news outlets. Some speculated the killer was a former police officer. Others believed the killer was involved in construction or landscaping, industries that used burlap and operated along coastal regions. A few pointed to residents of Oak Beach itself, citing their proximity to the disappearance of Shannan Gilbert. Then there were those who believed the killer had help, that someone else may have assisted in arranging the meetings, transporting bodies, or obscuring digital trails. Despite public fascination, the case remained frustratingly opaque. Without arrests, all theories remained speculative. Evidence was not shared. No clear suspect emerged. The idea of a lone killer hiding in plain sight, a family man or local business owner, persisted. But so did darker theories that someone powerful was involved or that corruption had stalled the case. Each new discovery only expanded the web of possibilities. Yet nothing brought clarity. The public waited. The media speculated. The families grieved. And somewhere in the gaps of behavior, timeline, and geography, the truth continued to hide. On July 13th, 2023, after more than a decade of stalled leads and mounting pressure, authorities announced a major breakthrough: the arrest of 59-year-old Rex Heuermann. Heuermann, a Manhattan-based architect and married father of two, was taken into custody outside his Midtown office. He lived in Massapequa Park, just 20 minutes from Gilgo Beach. For years, he had maintained a quiet life, commuting into the city and returning home to a modest red house on a suburban street. He was charged with the murders of Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello, 3 of the Gilgo Four. Prosecutors stated that Heuermann was also the prime suspect in the killing of Maureen Brainerd Barnes, though formal charges were still pending. The case against him had taken shape quietly over 18 months. A task force, formed in early 2022, used a combination of phone records, burner phones, and historical cell tower data to tie Heuermann to communications with the victims. The phones used to arrange meetings had pinged in locations matching his known movements, including his office in Manhattan and his home in Long Island. DNA evidence also played a role. A hair recovered from the burlap used to wrap one of the victims was linked through mitochondrial DNA to a female relative of Heuermann, possibly his wife. Investigators later obtained DNA from discarded pizza crust he had thrown away, which matched a male profile found on another victim. The arrest shocked the community. Neighbors described him as odd but unremarkable, a man who rarely interacted with others. His appearance was described as imposing. Over 6 feet tall, heavy-set, with thick glasses and a deep voice. He frequented local hardware stores and lived in the same home for decades. For many, Heuermann's arrest felt like the answer they had waited for. But for others, it opened more questions. If he was responsible for the Gilgo Four, what about the other victims? The ones dismembered? The child? The man? Law enforcement made it clear the investigation was ongoing. The arrest was a breakthrough, but not a conclusion. Gilgo Beach had given up a name, but the story wasn't over. In the days following Rex Heuermann's arrest, investigators descended on his Long Island home. What they found inside added chilling weight to the case. The house, weathered and cluttered, sat on a quiet street in Massapequa Park. Neighbors watched as teams of officers, technicians, and forensic specialists spent nearly 2 weeks combing through every room, every drawer, every storage space. They removed over 200 firearms, many legally owned, but raising questions about intent. Computers, hard drives, and servers were seized, including custom-built devices and encrypted files. Boxes of documents, burner phones, and digital storage devices were collected and logged. Searches extended beyond the house. Investigators examined Heuermann's storage units across Long Island and into South Carolina, where he owned property. The units contained additional electronics and personal effects. The full contents have not been publicly disclosed, but officials confirmed that some items may hold forensic value. Authorities also noted that Heuermann had searched extensively for news about the Gilgo case and for information on the victims. His internet history included violent pornography, torture-related content, and methods of evading law enforcement. In totality, the evidence painted a picture of someone leading two very different lives. One as a professional architect and family man, the other steeped in secrecy, control, and obsession. Still, the evidence was circumstantial in some areas and direct in others. Prosecutors built their case carefully. No confessions had been made. The legal process would take time. But for the families of Melissa, Megan, and Amber, the arrest and the details unearthed in its aftermath offered something rare: movement. The house may have looked ordinary from the outside. Inside, it held years of darkness waiting to be unpacked. Even after the arrest of Rex Heuermann, the Long Island serial killer case remains unresolved in critical ways. The most pressing question is simple. Is Heuermann responsible for all the victims? He has been charged in connection with 3 murders and named the prime suspect in a 4th. But the total number of bodies recovered along Ocean Parkway stands at 10. Several of those cases, such as those of Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack, involved dismemberment and were partially found decades earlier in entirely different locations. Others, like the unidentified Asian male and the toddler, don't fit the known pattern. Law enforcement has not formally connected Heuermann to those cases. The methods of killing, disposal, and victim type differ enough that some investigators and experts believe multiple perpetrators may be involved. There's also the matter of Shannan Gilbert. While her disappearance led to the discovery of the Gilgo 4, her case was long treated separately. Police maintained that her death was not a homicide, but her family, private experts, and advocates have continued to challenge that conclusion. If Heuermann was active between 2007 and 2010, as alleged, what happened before and after? Did he simply stop killing? Or are there other victims not yet discovered? Could law enforcement's years of internal dysfunction have allowed more crimes to go unnoticed? Public suspicion also lingers. The handling of the case in its early years damaged trust. The fall of Police Chief James Burke for unrelated misconduct only fueled theories of corruption and cover-up. Some believe the delays in solving the case were not just due to complexity, but willful neglect. Digital forensics and new DNA technologies are being used to re-examine evidence. But some leads are cold, some victims still unnamed. The scope of the case may never be fully known. The arrest of Rex Heuermann answered some questions, but created many others. For the families whose loved ones remain unidentified or unaccounted for, justice still feels distant. Gilgo Beach remains a place of partial answers. A coastline littered not only with tragedy, but with silence. The events surrounding the Long Island serial killer case left a permanent mark on the local community, one etched not just in headlines, but in the lives of those who call the South Shore home. Residents of Gilgo Beach, Oak Beach, and nearby towns lived for years with an uneasy awareness. The discovery of so many bodies in their midst, along roads they commuted, in marshes their children passed, shook their sense of safety. A place once known for its summer calm became synonymous with hidden horrors. Distrust in law enforcement deepened. For some, it was the years of silence, the unanswered questions. For others, it was the handling of the victims themselves, women whose disappearances were initially dismissed because of their professions. The case became a reflection of how society values certain lives over others. Families of the victims carried that weight publicly. They organized vigils, put up posters, and spoke to media outlets. Many felt they had to become investigators themselves, pushing for progress when official channels stalled. Their advocacy was persistent and often painful. In the wake of Rex Heuermann's arrest, some residents expressed relief. Others remained cautious, knowing too well that one arrest does not equal full resolution. Questions still linger. So do fears. What remains now is a kind of shared mourning, not just for the victims, but for what was lost along the way. The sense of security, the belief in justice, the hope for closure. The communities near Gilgo Beach continue to live in the long shadow of this case. They know the coastline holds stories that may never be fully told. And for every answer that surfaces, another seems to sink back into the tide. Over a decade ago, a young woman ran barefoot into the night, her voice trembling over a 911 call that would later echo across the nation. That night led to the discovery of 4 women buried in the sand. Then more, and more still. From Ocean Parkway to Manorville, from burlap-wrapped remains to long, cold digital trails, the Gilgo Beach case has become one of the most complex and unsettling criminal investigations in modern American history. The arrest of Rex Heuermann provided a name, a face, a partial answer. But it also sharpened the edges of what we still don't know. Other victims remain unidentified, other families unheard. Evidence is still being processed. Leads are still being chased. This case was never just about one man or one investigation. It became a reflection of systemic failure. How certain victims are overlooked, how institutions falter, and how silence can stretch across years. The sands of Gilgo Beach have held too many secrets. Some may never be fully uncovered. Others may only surface when the tide turns once more. For now, what we have are pieces, timelines, phone records, DNA fragments, and the hope that persistence will bring light into what remains a deeply shadowed corner of the American landscape. The Gilgo Beach murders remind us that some stories don't close easily, that some truths stay buried, not because they're lost, but because no one ever truly went looking. So what do you think of today's video? Do you have something you want us to feature next? Tell us in the comments. It will also mean a lot to us if you like and subscribe. Close the book if you can. This is Black Chapter.